a lot of times feeding the transition from the calf range to when they arrive at the feedlot, it's probably easier on the beef on dairy or the Holstein system than compared to the conventional beef system, because those animals are already receiving grain. They know how to eat from a bunk, so that makes my life as a nutritionist quite easier.
Welcome to the Rumination Podcast presented by Jeffo Nutrition. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Eckerle. Today I'm pleased to receive Dr. Pedro Carvalho to discuss dairy beef feeding systems. Dr. Carvalho is an assistant professor and feedlot specialist with AgNext at Colorado State University. Previously, Dr. Carvalho served as an assistant professor and feedlot specialist at UC Davis, located at the Desert Research and Extension Center. Originally from Brazil, he received his bachelor's degree in animal science from the Federal University of Mato Grosso do Sul, Brazil. After working in the industry in Brazil, Pedro received his master's degree at the University of Illinois, followed by his doctoral degree at Penn State University. Currently, his work encompasses applied research projects in feedlot systems and methods to enhance dairy beef production. This work focuses on the use of antimicrobial alternatives, beef on dairy crosses, and different dietary and implant programs for calf-fed dairy beef animals. Welcome to the show, Dr. Carvalho.
Thanks for having me, Greg. It's a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. And wonderful to be here. Hopefully the weather is focusing on good cattle feeding strategies going into late summer here. And so as we talk about that, today's discussion seems to be pretty pertinent to our industry today, as beef herd numbers have been in a decline as we've been through drought, and then we're in a liquidation phase. However, when we look at the steady flux of beef on dairy and dairy crosses or dairy beef going into our industry, these seem to be a little bit more profitable for producers. For that sake, in your opinion, what can we expect to see numbers of dairy and dairy and beef crosses in feedlots in the future?
Yeah, that's a really, let's say, hot topic right now, right, Greg? I've been working with Holstein here since I started grad school, and the past few years we've seen this increase in the utilization of beef semen in the dairy cows. It's a lot of people, when we talk about beef on dairy, it's not new. This thing we've done that in the past, but I think now it probably came to stay. There are a lot of factors that are affecting that. The increase in the use of sex semen and the decrease in the beef cow herd probably pushing that a lot. And I think it's something that came to stay. I think a lot of people are learning how to do that in the dairy industry. We still have to remember that the main goal of a dairy farmer is getting their cow pregnant. But I think that it's a great opportunity for dairy farmers to increase their profitability. And the data that we've seen right now, it also shows really good opportunity for feedlot producers when we compare to the Holstein bull calf, which we've learned how to feed them over the years. We've done pretty good job in learning how to feed Holstein bull calves, and now there's a lot of questions that we are trying to answer how to feed those beef on dairy calves. But to answer your question, I think that's something that came to stay. And total numbers might still the same, because basically the number of dairy cows are still the same. But what is changed is basically the genetic of those bull calves that are coming to our feedlot.
Right. And as we look at that, it's a consistent flow of animals into a feedlot rather than the traditional spring run and then fall run calves coming in October and April, when we have fall borns and late young long yearlings and things of that nature with the beef industry. So it allows feedlots to definitely have a consistent supply, right?
Absolutely. That's something Greg and we met last week in person. We were talking about this. One of the advantages of the beef on dairy market and the bull calf dairy market in general is that that's a consistent supply that we have throughout the year. So it gives us time to plan and see and have a better understanding when we are going to slaughter those animals. So those are pretty good things that we can think about when feeding those animals. So the challenge is that those animals also stay a long time on feed. If we're talking about a calf-fed animal that comes out from the calf range with 300 to 500 pounds, depends where you are at, those animals are going to stay at least close to 10 months in the feedlot. So that's something that they take to consideration. But it's a consistent supply, of course.
Perfect. Perfect. And as we're pushing the supply chain and looking at these genetics of transitioning the dairy to utilizing more beef semen, can we expect to see specific British breeds, or is it just going to be predominant Black Angus? Or would you propose that maybe if we want to look at some other traits, some continental or some exotic for southern calf markets would be included into the mix?
That's an excellent question. Then, for the past year and a half, I've been talking a lot about this. When we look at the numbers, and from 2017 to 2021, I had that summarized. We from, let's say, up to 2017, we used to have about 2.5 million doses of beef semen being on the market every year in the US. From 17 to 21, for example, that's the last time that I checked, we had an increase from 2.5 to close to 9 millions, and that's how much we're expecting. So over 6 million doses of increase in domestic semen sale here in the US, only on beef breeds. So when we went from 2.5 to over 9 million, about half of those it's coming from Angus. So we expect that the majority of those crosses are going to be the black-hearted animals. There is in the second place we've seen a lot of limousine crosses, and then Simmental, and the Charolais breed is the one that has increased a lot. They went from less than 25,000 doses being sold in 2017 to close to 600,000 in 2021. So that's a huge increase, like over 2,000% increase in only 5 years. So we've seen that increase in potentially those continental breeds, those bigger frame crosses, especially when we talk about feeding calf-fed animals. We put them in the feedlot really young age, and we want to push them as hard as we can. So we've seen a good increase in continental breeds, but Angus is still the majority of them. One thing that I can tell you, Greg, for sure, I don't think we're going to be talking about a specific breed. We've seen more variation with thin breed than when we compare between or among different breeds. Even the Angus breed, you can see small frame animals and big frame animals. I think we will be looking for specific bulls in the future and how they can complement those the dairy cow that we have. And we can talk about potentially using a specific frame size bull for Jersey cows or a different bull for Holstein cows. And where are we finishing those animals? One thing that I always like to tell people when I'm talking about feeding Holstein steers, I'm a tall and skinny guy, like I'm a 6'7" guy, and I usually tell people my recommendation is like the only thing that I recommend you doing with a Holstein steers is to make the Holstein steer that does not look like me. So push them as hard as you can. Don't take them to the pasture. Avoid backgrounding them. So push them in high energy diets so we don't convert that Holstein steers into a dairy cow. With this cross, maybe there is a potential of using a smaller frame bull and potentially utilizing those winter grass background in those calves. There's some data coming out from Oklahoma really interesting about that. So perhaps there is a potential of using a smaller frame bull if we know that those animals are going to go to a background system. And in Southern California, for example, where we do the calf-fed system and it's pretty hot, maybe there is a potential of using those Charolais crosses where we are going to push them pretty hard and they will be less affected by the high heat. One thing that we did in the research last year, we compared just the straight Holsteins versus the black crosses, and we do see an improvement in about 5% in general feed efficiency, which is huge if you think about the whole feedlot industry. But one thing that we observed, we had some rumen bolus in those animals, and we observe a greater rumen temperature on those black crosses when compared to the straight Holsteins. So what we are doing in 2023 now is comparing how is the Charolais cross compared to the Holstein cross? So there's a lot of questions, a lot of people doing research in the whole US, which is great. So we are doing research in California, even though I'm in Colorado now. We are going to be doing research here in Colorado. Texas Tech is doing research, really nice research coming out. Oklahoma, Penn State. So there's a lot of Michigan State, a lot of good universities doing research on that. And hopefully, we're gonna have more answers than questions in the near future.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, and to summarize, so basically it's going in an ice cream parlor, pick your favorite flavor for bull, right? And then
Exactly.
on the other frame sport of it, I mean, standing next to you last week, I'm sitting at about 5'10", you're 6'7". I would probably be judged in judging class as an easy feeder.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those where we look at it and using some human references and some humor here, but I'm like, kind
Yeah.
of got to moderate that frame score down. And I think that has some importance to the packer when we look at meat to bone ratio on these dairy animals of, one, we got to make them fit the box. Two, they
Mm-hmm.
have to cut out, right, to be profitable when we get to that packer level. And I know there's some animosity when we mention packers and things in the industry, but there are end user at the name of the game. So when we have that, so how can we rear these animals to help moderate that frame score? And you kind of hit on it with a Jersey Bull, maybe throw a little continental influx into it, and then the larger frame Holstein, maybe some smaller framed Angus. Is that a good synopsis?
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. And one thing that when this all started, let's say back in, I was finishing my degree in 2019, and the conversation was getting bigger on which breed and everything. So I went to a cattle buyer in JBS and I asked him, "So what is your favorite cross now?" And what he told me is the Holstein, because the purebred Holstein, I know what I'm getting. So when you talk about box beef and things like that, the consistent really matters. So one of the fears when this all started, a lot of dairy producers were just using the cheapest semen that they had, most of the time Angus semen, because you're gonna get a premium from the black-headed cattle. And but we were adding a lot of variation. The genetics in the Holsteins are quite consistent. So one thing that we have to be careful when we talk about, we know that they were going to increase muscle to bone ratio. They are going to have greater yield in the packing plan, but it's keep in mind that we have to be consistent. The consistency that the hosting has, we have to try to keep that for this segment as well. So that's a very important point. Yeah, and but right now it's like you said, pick your best flavor and let's see what's going to happen. But I think I see a lot of potential in the Angus. I think Angus is going to stay up front, especially. I think the Angus Association is doing a good job, and I think that a lot of those calves are going to CAB premium, so it's encourages the producers to use. But I do think there's a lot of opportunities also for these continental breeds, such as Charolais, for example.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And I think it, as we look at it from a nationwide perspective, since we have so many entities doing research, that regionally, if we're looking across the Southwest, Amarillo, Arizona, California, maybe Southern Colorado, depending on the type of year, Southwest Kansas, are probably going to look at things differently than they would in the Ohio River Valley, Michigan. That just based on ingredients, the availability, as well as temperature and climate, is going to make some large changes for choice, right?
Absolutely, and even the way that we feed those animals it varies a lot. Like the way that we were feeding beef on dairy crosses in California is different than the way that we think about feeding them here in Colorado. So, and that's these regional differences plays a big role in how we're going to feed those animals. Here, like I said, or the Northeast region, Upper Midwest, we may see opportunities for background in the corn stalks or things like that, which we don't have that opportunity in California. So we have to go to a calf-fed system where we're going to push those animals as hard as we can, starting early on. So those are all great points to point out. And even like shipping them now, sometimes they're coming from out west to be finished in the high plains or vice versa. So that's also has to be taken in consideration.
And I definitely adds a lot of stress moving them that far for sure. And so when we take that and look at these animals as a feeding program, when would we look at the most critical point for them from a perspective of stress and turnover, and then just also just looking at starting, because you mentioned we have calf feds, which are coming off milk to grain. But then when they leave the calf ranch, do they have two starting periods? And then is one more important than the other? Or I know I'm loading this question up, but I'm just like, they all kind of intertwine. So, question one, most critical point of the feeding of the dairy beef Holstein or dairy beef animal. And then what would be their typical starting period, or do they have two?
Well, as a person who worked in extension and now I have 50% outreach, the answer is depends, right?
That's a nutritionist answer for sure.
It's always depends, and it's going to depend a lot the time of the year. We've seen California during summertime. That creates much bigger challenge than during the winter time. One thing that I would say is, as a nutritionist, a lot of times feeding the transition from the calf range to when they arrive at the feedlot, it's probably easier on the beef on dairy or the hosting system than compared to the conventional beef system, because those animals are already receiving grain. They know how to eat from a bunk, so that makes my life as a nutritionist quite easier. But at the same time, those calves get to the feedlots younger, so we may have to make sure that they have proper nutrition. We used to give a boost of vitamins and things once that we get them to the feedlot, because we know that those calves are quite young and they would face those challenges. But on the diet aspect, another thing that we've done over the years, and Dr. Richard Zinn, who I had the pleasure to work a lot while I was in California, we would divide the feeding system in three different phases. The 300 days, we would divide in three groups of 100 days, let's say like this. So those first 100 days on feed would be the most critical ones, I would say, especially in the protein requirements. We used to try to boost a little bit of protein, because sometimes those animals are really good in feed conversion, but they, even though they're eating a high percentage of their mature or their body weight, they are still limiting the metabolizable protein. So we used to like to give a booster of protein the first 112 days, which we would call the growing phase. Other than that, it's just making sure, remember that those animals may get really stressed from shipping. If it's summertime, provide excess as much as you can of water. Try to, but diet wise, there's not big changes, because most of the time those animals are already eating some source of grain, and the rumen is quite adapted, and the animals itself is quite adapted. But we always try to make sure that those animals receive a good booster of vitamins and sometimes antibiotics when they arrive in the feedlot, because that's the most critical time post shipping, and they arrive in the feedlot pretty young. And in the calf range phase is also, especially summertime, we would see greater morbidity and mortality when they were in the calf range phase. But after we would say after 56 days that those beef on dairy calves are in the feedlot, you should be well set if they are doing well.
Perfect, perfect. And so with that, can we be a little bit more aggressive in our feeding strategy with them since they're already kind of primed and ready to go? Or do we kind of, if don't want to burn them too early, since they are going to take a little bit longer to get that growth that we want out of them? So it's not just setting that steam engine on full go and letting it roll, or do we just need to moderate it back? Because you mentioned there's 3 periods. So that first 100 is that grow phase. So is that a moderate growth, and then we just ramp up for the next 200?
So that's a great question. That's something that we've on the hostings, and I have to pause and think about that. In California, where I was, is one of the largest hay production places in the country. So there we had a abundance of hay. So we would feed diets with 12% hay, while in the high plains or other places they would feed half of that. So we would like to work on that 10-12% hay from start to finish with the hostings. Now with these beef on dairy crosses, there are some feedlots. So what they are doing is just give a little extra, maybe 3 times more than that, up to 30% hay, just so people can visualize that. Put more roughage in the diet, decrease the energy, let them grow up to 700, 800 pounds, and then we make the transition to that hotter diet. So that's something that I've talked to, commercial feed yards, some of them were doing and being successful with that. Some of them were trying to just feed them similar to the way that they feed Holsteins. One challenge is when we come to other places, especially uh, Texas Panhandle, other like west part of Kansas, sometimes they are pushing those animals pretty hard up front. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've been hearing a lot about liver abscesses in those cattle, which might create some challenge. There, one thing that I think, and that's a lot of anecdotal, because there is no silver bullet to control liver abscess. And we've been trying to do that for, I'm not the best person to talk about this, but we've been trying to do that. But it's interesting because every time that I talk to people who are feeding those animals in different areas than California, where I was, they've seen a lot of greater numbers in liver abscess than we used to see down there. And as I mentioned earlier, we feed more roughage down there. They feed more roughage down there. Uh, it is a different type of roughage. Most of those places in Texas Panhandle, they may feed some silage, which it may vary the condition of the sites throughout the year. And there is probably more weather variation. So I think a lot of people ask questions about the abscess in the whole season and now beef on dairy crosses. I think a couple of things to keep in mind. We feed them longer than a traditional beef animal, so they might face some challenge. We make that transition to grain earlier, so there is a possibility that something post rumen happening early on, and those animals are going to be more susceptible for challenge later on. The way that we feed them varies between the locations. There are places that they feed more roughage, and you see less incidence of liver abscess. There are places where they feed different type of roughage, and there are places where the weather is more consistent, so you have less variation in the feed intake. So I think putting those all together, again, it depends where you are and everything. So there's no silver bullet for that. But I would avoid pushing them really, really hard from start to finish because I think that's what might be creating those issues later on
Hmm.
once we see those animals in the processing plant.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. And then, kind of the newest elephant in the room when it comes to just general feeding and everything is implant strategy. Or just
Yeah.
to kind of wrap up, what would we recommend on an implant on a 400-day fed Holstein or 300-day fed beef on dairy cross?
That's probably one of the questions that I've got more in the past year,
Yep.
and the answer I don't know.
Yep.
That's something we can't. Some implants are labeled for reimplantation, so we may stay with them. But definitely, we're probably going to be looking for other alternatives. We may be looking for implanting those calves earlier before they leave the calf range, or using different the implants that are available that we can reimplant. But that's going to be a big challenge, I can tell you. But the industry has been able to overcome a lot of other challenges, and hopefully we can do that. During my PhD, I did a couple of studies showing how beneficial was implanting Holstein steers and potentially reimplanting them. And there is a possibility that that's a bigger animal. They might be metabolizing that implant quicker than a traditional beef breed, which would lead to a greater need of reimplantation.
Hmm.
And now we are limited in that
Right.
technology. It's not
Right.
that we can't use; we're just limited in the portfolio
Yeah.
that we used to have.
Yeah. The
Uh,
picture's changed, right? So.
exactly. But I do think, and I recommend people using that technology. We did like even measure implant concentration in the beef, and it's safe. It's something that's been shown before. It's extremely safe, and hopefully we can keep using that. And this is critical for those animals as well.
Mhm, mhm. So, and then to wrap up today, what would be three of your top take home messages of working with dairy beef crosses or straight Holsteins in a feeder situation?
Great. So I think on the hosting side, I would push them from start to finish as much as we can. Be consistent. They have good genetics. They marble well. They can produce a really good quality. On the beef on dairy, I think right now there are more questions than answers. I do think that we, instead of be looking for the best breed, we may be looking for the best bull in each breed. Our research show potential 5% enhancement when you compare to the straight Holsteins, which I've seen some people showing greater numbers. I've seen some people showing worse numbers. But if we think about that, we can improve 15-20% of our whole industry in 5%. That's a big thing. And how we feed those animals, I think there is potential good opportunity for background in them. uh, it could be in the feedlot, it could be in the grazing system, but yes, I think those and the liver abscess, which is always a big question, is I think is a condition of the region and the feeding system, and it varies from feedlot to feedyard. One thing that I would tell you, Greg, and that's something that we are planning to be doing in the near future is, and we didn't touch on that at all, it's understanding how much the early life management of those calves can impact the later. So our goal is to start a research this fall where we are going to manage those calves different in the first 2 weeks and see how it's going to impact the whole life of the animal. So the management on the calf ranch is, we might be looking more on that, and it could be from extended feeding colostrum or just simply feeding colostrum. And now the dairy farmers see more value on those calves. So 2 years ago they were being sold for $250. I've heard $600 now. So if the dairy farmers see more value, he's going to take care of that calf better, and that's going to change. We think that's going to change how much those animals are going to perform later on. And so the management on the calf ranch, I think we're going to see more interest on that in the near future as well. So I don't know if there are three big take home messages. I do think they increase efficiency, they increase production, we've seen the increase the rebuy area or the rebuy shape, which could be a challenge in the hosting. We may see an increase in yield grade, but not in excess. Uh, but we have to figure out how to better feed those animals. That's for sure. We have a good understanding of the hostings. The beef on dairy is still a question, and I think it's job security. I
Right,
joke about
right.
that.
Yeah, it's one
Yeah,
of those, when we look at it, things are always evolving in cattle feeding, and we're looking at new opportunities to be putting quality U.S. beef on the plate, and be it coming from a dairy background or whatever. When we get it into our feeding systems, we know how to feed beef here in the States, and so we do that very well, and it shows globally. So with that, definitely a follow up probably in the works of looking at your early life calf ranch management here in maybe the next year when you get some data or something. That'd be great. But we appreciate your insight today, Dr. Carvalho, and it's been a pleasure to sit down and discuss this with you.
my pleasure, Greg. Thank you very much for having me again. I will be happy to come back in a couple months and share what we are doing with those early management. Also sharing those two breed comparisons that we did and more research that we did last year. I'll be super happy to come because I think we need that information out there. There's a lot of people talking about it. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of uh, published data right now, scientifically published data, which I think we need that. And hopefully, I think this is coming from a lot of different sources.
Which would be
So yeah,
great. Yeah,
great. Yeah.
be
So
great.
thank you for having me again. I will be happy to have if someone has questions. I'm pretty sure you guys are going to leave our contact information, and everything. I will be happy to answer any questions that someone may have.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I surely want to thank our audience today for listening. I'll remind you that you can subscribe to our channel at jeffo.ca. And so you won't miss the next episode of GFO's Rumination Podcast. Please find us at jeffo.ca, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify. This podcast was brought to you by Jeffo, Precision Nutrition for a Growing World.